Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. This is our legacy show, and you may notice that Vincent Turner is not with us today. Our co-host and founder has a day off. He's visiting with family and friends back in the 901 in Memphis. Joining me is Brian LeBel. Our producer and engineer is Jeremiah Long. Thank you for putting these photos that you'll be seeing in just a second together. Today, Brian, we're going to talk about Larry Fitzgerald, one of the great receivers of all time. He may not be your number one, and he may not even be on your podium, but he certainly is in the room in terms of being talked about for an all-time legacy, a great receiver, a fantastic career. Obviously, the numbers speak for themselves, but as a person, Larry has a match in terms of what his NFL on the field and his off the field abilities have been able to correlate throughout his long lifetime.
Yeah, Larry Legend, right? Very easy guy to root for. You know, when you watch, for me personally, the Arizona Cardinals, if you think of the Arizona Cardinals, right? Face of the franchise, because Warner wasn't there long enough. Palmer really wasn't there long enough to be like, typically your quarterback. But I think Larry's one of the few non-quarterbacks to be the face of a team. And I think Arizona, if you're a fan of the Cardinals, I think you're proud of that, right? What he was able to do, his career, how long he was there, his entire tenure was there. I mean, like you said, I don't think he's the best wide receiver of all time, but he's in the discussion, right? If you're going to go down the list a little bit, you don't have to get through too many names before you get to Larry as being one of the best to ever do it.
Yeah, kind of the Kobe Bryant, right? Kobe had 5 championships, but he's always being compared to either LeBron or Michael or anybody else that you want to compare him to. But he's in the discussion. There's no way that you can have a basketball conversation without including him. He may not be your favorite. He may not be the best on your list, but for somebody, he at least deserves that type of recognition. And I agree that Larry Darnell Fitzgerald Jr., born on August 31st, 1983, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. His father, Larry Sr., was a sports reporter, and he worked for a local newspaper and got to get some of these great gigs that Minnesota had. Now, Minnesota has some great sports fans, don't get me wrong. And being Minnesota nice is sometimes an issue, right? You're not going to get booed very loud if you get booed at all in Minnesota, unless you're a Bear, unless you're a Lion, or unless you come in from the Packers. They'll boo you loudly when it comes to that, but they don't boo their own, at least not unless there's some reason for that. It's not like Philadelphia. But Larry was exposed at a very early age to professional sports. And when he was in high school, his freshman and sophomore year, he goes out for football, but he gets to be a ball boy on weekends for the Vikings in some of their games. And Larry gets to be around Chris Carter, and he gets to be around Warren Moon and some guy named Randy Moss and Robert Smith and John Randall. And those were influences on this young man's life that he got to see for his own while they're on the sideline. They're laughing, they're clowning up when they're winning, they're working hard. And he got to see and get a taste of what that next level was like at a very early age. And even though his high school experience, and let's take a look at this, right? So he goes to the Academy of Holy Angels, very small private Catholic school. There are only 600 students, and Larry excels there. He's an all-state wide receiver 2 times during his high school days, obviously his junior and his senior year. He had some issues while he was there, though. Unfortunately, he didn't have the grades, or at least, the academic standards that the NCAA required. So Brian, he ends up going to a military college, one in Pennsylvania. And Valley Forge Military College is where he spent a year and ends up playing there and does well enough to get recruited. And he had the grades to get recruited finally, with that he didn't have in high school. And he was able to put it all together, and the University of Pittsburgh ends up come a-calling. And his time with Dennis Green, his time of just being exposed in the right way to certain types of disciplines that it takes, that carries over. And his career at Pitt, freshman and sophomore year, outstanding. From the very get-go, Larry was a difference maker, and he was a guy that was going to be on the field and make a difference for the Panthers.
Yeah, if you look at his numbers, I mean, I think he had, including the bowl games in college, I think it's something like 34 TDs in 2 seasons. It's not too bad, right?
Right.
17 a pop. I don't think anybody will complain with those numbers.
Well, he gets to Pitt. 2002 is the first year that he's there. Their season opener was 2002, excuse me. In week 5, he gets his first touchdown against Toledo. he had 3 touchdowns just a couple weeks later against Virginia Tech. He had 2 more against West Virginia. He ended up that season with 69 receptions, 1,005 yards. So he ends up getting over 1,000. He had 12 touchdowns that first year. In 2003, so now he comes back as a sophomore, they open against Kent State. And we talked about Kent because of Jack Lambert, a show that we just finished earlier this morning. 3 touchdowns against Kent State. They end up beating the Golden Flashes 49-3 in that game. He had 9 touchdowns in his first 4 games. And then he had 4 consecutive games in a row where he had at least 2 touchdowns. There were 6 games that he had with at least 100 yards in reception yards. And he had 12 games in a row. His entire sophomore year, he ends up with at least 1 touchdown under his resume. And if you go back to his freshman year, he had another 6 games where he ended the season with at least 1 touchdown. So he has 18 games in a row that he has a touchdown. When they go into the Continental Tire Bowl, they go against West Virginia, and he gets kind of shut down in that game. He didn't have a touchdown, didn't have 100 yards. And so he ends his career there at Pittsburgh with 92 receptions, 1,600 yards, and 22 touchdowns his sophomore year. He's an All-American. He wins the Walter Camp Award, the Biletnikoff Award, and he's second to Jason White in the Heisman Trophy voting. Not a bad sophomore season.
Shout out the Big East. That was Pittsburgh in the Big East too.
No kidding.
Forget about that. But I mean, to go from a guy where like, hey, I don't know if I got the grades to do it, to being like, hey, I think I might be the second best player in the country coming out. That's not too bad. Pittsburgh it's an interesting school. If you talk about like the history of it and the kind of the smash mouth, they haven't really been good in a while. But I think Jordan Addison won the Biletnikoff there too, if I'm not mistaken. So they got 2 Biletnikoff winners there in the last 20 years. Just kind of interesting to think about. I don't know if Larry was the first one to win the award there, but I think he's kind of the face of their program too. He might be one of those rare guys that's the face of Pittsburgh football, at least in the modern era, and then his NFL team, Arizona. I think he might be one of the few guys that you can kind of say he holds the mantle for both of those. Would you agree with that, maybe?
Well, at least in recent years, yeah, Pitt has had at least in the 60s and 70s, and Jackie Sherrill can certainly attest to some of the great players that were part of that. But once you get in the new millennium, if you will, the early 2000s, I'd agree that, Larry definitely had a part to that. Again, for only 2 years. Now, he ended up having to request a release, if you will, and go to the NCAA. He says that 1 year in the military college would count as the 3-year separation between high school and eligibility to go pro. And the NFL agreed with me. The NCAA agreed with him, and they said that he can go. Oddly enough, at the very same time, Maurice Clarett was in a lawsuit with the NCAA to try to get out of his Ohio State commitment and to be able to be eligible for the pros. That's what he wanted to do and desire. But Larry was basically, they said, you know what, you're right. That 1 year that you went to military college, even though it wasn't at Pitt that you served, and we're going to count that as a year. And then the 2 years that he had his freshman and sophomore year, and he ends up being the 3rd overall taken in the upcoming draft by Arizona. And really it worked out magnificently for him. He had 2 great years at Pitt. I'm sure the Panther fans would have loved to have him for a 3rd or 4th year, a junior or senior. It didn't turn out that way. And he ends up in 2004 joining the Arizona Cardinals.
Probably the best draft pick the Cardinals have had, right? One of them. 3rd overall, you get a team that's really struggling. They don't really have a lot going on for them, and you bring in a guy with Larry who instantly, right? He comes in and he's instantly very, very good for you. They didn't really have a great quarterback room for a while too. If we'll talk about that a little bit, but a guy falls in your lap at number 3. Typically, you're sitting here and you're thinking, okay, maybe the 2 best guys off the board. I think Eli Manning went 1st overall that year, if I'm not mistaken. But I think he was the best non-quarterback coming out, and I think Arizona was very fortunate to get him there at 3, and they'll tell you the same thing. Yeah,
well, Dennis Green was the coach at Arizona at that time. So Dennis had remembered that, hey, this is a ball boy. I remember this guy. He looks familiar. I saw him on our sidelines, and he's that good? Mm-hmm. So how do we miss on that? So there's a familiarity in joining Dennis and being part of the roster there. And Dennis, remember, one of the great lines of all time is, we had him on the hook. and we let him off. And
Yeah,
just
we thought
it
that
was
would.
amazing.
Yep.
But
Yep.
he was a part of that for obvious reasons. He's number 3 overall. Josh McCown was a part of that first year, and he had 59 receptions for 780 yards, 8 touchdowns. In '05, they're 6-10. The Cardinals are, but Larry led the league with 103 receptions. He had 1,400 yards, 1,409 to be exact. He was 4th in the league there. He had 10 touchdowns, which is 5th in the league. But Larry's prowess and his legend begins to grow in terms of this is his first of many Pro Bowls. So it took his second year to where he really started to develop. His third year, they were 5-11. They were even worse. He had 69 receptions for just under 1,000 yards. He had 6 touchdowns. He had Kurt Warner and Matt Leinart. That was the first year that the two of them joined, and things started to change in '07. They were 8-8. Kurt Warner and Tim Hasselback were the guys that were a part of the quarterback room at that time, and it was really 2008 that we see the massive change for the organization. They were only 9-7, Brian, so they kind of sneak into the playoffs, but they ended up getting to host their first home playoff game since 1947. Let me say it again, fans. It was a half a century before they hosted a home playoff game in either St. Louis or Arizona. So 9-7, they end up getting the Atlanta Falcons. What an interesting year that they had.
Yeah, that's a bittersweet game, right? If you're a Falcons fan, obviously me being there, but I remember that was interestingly enough. You bring that up. The league off or the league is voting now. I think they're trying to figure out they might do some reseeding as far as the who hosts games and when you're going to the playoffs or whatever that is. But Arizona was kind of for a little bit they were talking about like, hey, should a 9-7 team really be hosting a playoff game? And then they ended up hosting 2 playoff games. You keep winning and they got to play again. They got to beat both wildcard teams, but that 2008 playoff run that Larry had is probably, if you want to talk about that, that was probably one of the best playoff runs maybe a receiver has ever had for what he did in those couple of games that led them to, the Super Bowl, obviously against Pittsburgh, one of the most memorable games. Actually, probably one of the more memorable Super Bowl games.
Yeah, it was great for a number of different reasons, but their playoff run, and Larry has 2 records for touchdowns during that time and also for total yards that they have. They end up hosting the Falcons. They're losing at halftime, but they end up winning that football game. They go the following week to Carolina. By the way, it was 30-24 was the final there. They go to Carolina. They beat the Panthers on the road. That was an early Cam Newton game, wasn't it? Where Cam early in the game was doing the Superman, pulling the shirt and the jacket apart, but they end up losing badly. Does the Carolina Panther home team in that game? Then they get to host Philadelphia in the NFC Championship game. The final there was 32-25, and really Kurt Warner, in my opinion, was on all cylinders. They could run the ball well, but Kurt, in his ability to find the open receiver, keep the sticks moving, and get the ball in the end zone. After his fantastic success with the greatest show on turf in St. Louis, oddly enough, he joins the Cardinal organization and starts to make things happen. Their defense was good enough for at least a Super Bowl appearance, the only one that Larry had, but a fantastic run and a great year there for Larry Fitzgerald there in 2008.
That was the resurgence of Kurt Warner, because you remember he had that brief stint in New York where he goes from saying, hey, he was the guy in St. Louis, then he gets hurt, and then Mark Bolger takes over for him, and then he goes to New York, and I think there was the game, I think you played probably with a concussion. This was kind of when we started talking about concussions. I think he had like 6 fumbles or something like that, 6 total turnovers. And we wrote Kurt Warner off. We're like, I don't know if this guy can play anymore. He just doesn't have it. I don't know if he's got the yips or whatever. And then to come back a couple years later and to kind of be at the forefront of this team, Larry Fitzgerald and Quan Bolden too, but Larry Fitzgerald is at the forefront of resurging Kurt Warner's career. He went from saying, hey, this guy was really, really good a couple of years ago to now he's leading the Cardinals again. We're like, hey, kind of cemented his status as being a Hall of Famer. And I think Larry it's very early, obviously it's still very early in his career, but after that 2008 and then the 2009 run, you kind of said, hey, this guy's special, right? He's different. And obviously it's not going to be a surprise if we see this guy in a gold jacket here and, whenever he ends up retiring, which ended up being much, much later than that.
Yeah. Kirk ends up going to the 3 Super Bowls. He's 1 and 2 in them, but certainly a difference maker in terms of his career status, and his eligibility for the Hall of Fame was certainly enhanced.
Yeah.
Going from New York and Ray must go. Remember, those were the chants that were coming from the Giant fans. They wanted everybody out of there, right? They don't like losing, and they get rid of Kurt. He goes where he's appreciated. The Dennis Green, Ken Wisenhunt, Bruce Arians era, now Cliff Kingsbury, several different coaches, a tremendous amount of wide receiver coaches, offensive coordinators, quarterback coaches that you have to deal with. And Larry had certainly, there were several people that went through the door there in the Arizona coaching staff. And for him to, one, stay as long as he did, and two, work with all of them to where we're glad we've got this guy. Number 11 is a difference maker for us. And he's really the longevity and the cornerstone of the organization. For him to be a part of that. That 2009 year, you mentioned that very quickly. We'll just say the 51-45 final against Green Bay in overtime, a great playoff game. Not the greatest. We'll talk about that in a second. But they end up losing that year to New Orleans. And New Orleans eventually ends up going to the Super Bowl and winning that, the only championship that the Saints fans have ever had. But that was Larry's portion of that. So a good year. Wasn't great, but it was one of the best that the organization has had. And Larry again sees the playoffs, goes deep into it. Things are really looking up for him in the organization.
And then they have a dry spell, right? They don't really do a lot for a while. This was kind of the epitome of his Cardinals career, right? They got 1 or 2 years where, hey, we're pretty good. And then you got 6 or 7 where it's just we're either average, below average, or just absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
But you tip your cap to Larry. You talked about all the coaching, like the kind of the coaching carousel and all the different guys he dealt with and all the different guys coming out of the door. So he was in the same era as guys like Chad Johnson, Terrell Owens, right? That I don't want to call them divas, but they're, you know what I mean? That the attention guys that like, hey, I need the ball, I need this, whatever. They're in the media. You love talking to them after the game and during the week because you never know what they're going to say, right? It's must-see TV. It's reality television. And Larry was kind of the opposite. You know what I mean? Larry was very to himself, very quiet. Out of all the issues they had in Arizona during his tenure, and I know they had the success, we just alluded to that, but he never complained, right? He was never like, hey, trade me, move me, whatever, get me some help, this, that, the other. He showed up to work and he did what he had to do for, what was it, the 17 years he was there, which is really a testament to him. And that's, it's honestly very incredible. And it shows a lot about like who he is as not just a football player, but as a person.
Yeah, during the 17 years, right? He only had 4 years where he went to the playoffs. And you mentioned that dry spell between 2009 and 2014, right? You got 5 years there where they didn't go to the playoffs at all, and they only had one playoff game in 14. They go again in 15. They have 2 games. They win the first, lose the second, but then that was it. That was 4 years out of the 17. But that one includes the Super Bowl year. But you don't hear all that much about Larry Fitzgerald and being on. He was on the highlight reel for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think he earned the respect of reporters, of the league, from fellow players, and from the fans. I think all of those combined was one of those things where you just go, he's a part of the conversation. He may not be my number one. We talked about this earlier, but he certainly is one of those guys that you want to hear from.
He's the kind of guy where you flip on SportsCenter on Monday morning and you'll see Larry Fitzgerald has 9 catches, 117 yards, a touchdown, and the Cardinals lose 34-17. It was that kind of thing. It was that kind of guy. But he showed up. He knew he was probably going to get double teamed, or they're going to put the other team's number 1 corner on me, and he was still very, very productive, very, very successful. And there are a lot of guys that play quarterback. You talk about Kurt Warner. We're alluding now the Carson Palmer era in the mid 2010s, but other than that, there was not a lot of really good quarterback play there in Arizona, and he still made the most of it.
Let's take a look at that. You bring that up. I took the liberty of writing down. So in 2004, when he was a rookie, Sean King and Josh McCown were the 2 quarterbacks there. John Navarre was in the room in 2006, along with McCown. Kurt Warner comes in. Matt Leinart is also a part of that. Derek Anderson, John Shelton, Brian Hoyer, Ryan Lindley, Carson Palmer, Drew Stanton, Matt Barkley, Blaine Gabbert, and most recently Kyler Murray. He played with all of those different quarterbacks heading the organization. And I mentioned Dennis Green, Ken Wisenhunt. That was a change when Dennis got let go, and Russ Grimm was the assistant head coach then. It's odd that Russ didn't get promoted, but Bruce Arians and, as I mentioned, Cliff Kingsbury is now the head coach, or at least was during the end portion of Larry's career. So a lot of different folks were in the room. And again, just to emphasize the importance of this, Larry was there for all of it. That's the neat thing about him. They can say, well, yeah, I had Larry for 3 or 4 years, or I had him for 5, or however long my stay was. But during the 17-year career, and all of them wearing the same uniform, he ends up being one of the mainstays. And again, as you mentioned, Brian, the face of the franchise.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, the only guys, I think Derek Anderson is more famous for the 1 year where Cleveland was like, hey, we're a playoff team. You know what I mean? He helped turn that
Right.
Browns team around, and then didn't do much else after that. But you talk about Kurt Warner, because remember when they brought Kurt in, they didn't really know if Kurt would start, right? He was coming off of a terrible tenure with the Giants. People didn't know if he was going to play again. People didn't know what was going to happen. And then he's able to come in, and they, something clicks there, and with Arians and with Fitzgerald, everything works out well. But realistically, the only guy they brought in, I mean, you draft Matt Leinart. I think he was 8th overall. I'm not 100% certain, but he was supposed to be their guy, right? He was supposed to be the guy that comes in and helps turn the franchise around. We have our receiver. We have this. And then Palmer later on, but he realistically had maybe a handful, five of those 17 years where he had actually like above average and decent quarterback play. And almost all 5 of those years, he was incredibly productive, and they're in the playoffs and the Super Bowl for one of them.
Well, Carson ends up getting hurt real early in his career, that knee, and I think that had a lot of effect on him. Obviously, that was with Cincinnati, but he's trying to keep it going and rejuvenate it. Hardworking dude, and keep me upright. I think that was part of the issue with Kurt Warner is you couldn't keep him upright.
Yeah.
Or throw in the other fact that I got no one to throw to.
Yeah.
In New York, Kirk comes to you. You mentioned Anquan Bolden or just Johnson out of the backfield. You could dump it off and keep the drive going because there were guys that were able to make big plays, and Larry was a part of that. So, for obvious reasons, the success. You give me a fairly good offensive line, fairly good. That's all I need, because if I can dump the ball off, I need a running back that can catch. I'm talking about my quarterback. I've got to have a tight end. And if he can block, that's great. But I need to have somebody down. And Bolden and Fitzgerald, are you kidding me? We can move and we can score. And that was certainly a part of what the mainstay of the Cardinal offense was during those days. And beating San Francisco, beating Seattle, taking care of the Rams the way that they did, and win the division as many times as they did. It didn't happen a lot, but the way that they did it, you could tell we were offense first, and we were very difficult to stop. Other defenses had their hands full if they were going to take on the Cardinals offense.
Yeah, they it's funny enough how good Larry and Anquan were. Probably not even the top duo that Kurt Warner threw to, because remember he had Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce. But I would say they're probably not that far behind if you were to, if you were to compare side by side career numbers. But I think Arizona for a little bit there was a place, especially because you had Larry, right? He was the cornerstone. He was the building block. He's the foundation there. So if I'm a quarterback, I'm saying, hey, I get to go throw this guy. He didn't really miss any time. You know what I mean? He didn't really have any significant injuries. He always showed up to work, had a great attitude. He's a guy that you probably wanted to throw the football to, right? You're like, hey, I get to go to work with Larry Fitzgerald today. I want to make sure he gets the football, right? He's not, and like I said earlier, some of the kind of the diva wide receivers you had in the area, and Larry was the opposite of that. He said, hey man, hey, if you can, give me the ball when you can. I'm open, whatever. But I think for a while there, he made it to where quarterbacks wanted to go to a place where really, I mean, not a lot of people talk about it, but like Arizona's not a great place to play, right? So, I think Larry was kind of the pull there for a little bit to bring in a guy like Carson Palmer who said, hey, okay, we see what you can do. Let's see if you get healthy. Let's rejuvenate you. And the same with Kurt Warner.
Well, he had 1,432 receptions. Not a bad number, right? In the 17 years, he was targeted 2,300 times. He played in 263 regular season games, 17,492. Most quarterbacks don't have that number, and that's just one receiver. 121 touchdowns. He had 13 fumbles in his 17 years, and he had 10 that he lost. So he picked up 3 of them before a defensive back or safety was able to get it away from him. The playoff records that he had in 2008, that was the year they went to the Super Bowl. He had 7 touchdowns during that playoff run, which is an NFL record. He had 546 yards. He averaged 18.2 yards per reception, which is absolutely outstanding during those 4 games. And that includes the Super Bowl loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. But he ended up with 10 touchdowns in the playoffs, 942 total yards. He averaged 16.5 yard per reception. And that's just during the 4 years of the playoffs that he was involved in. Anything else about his career? I do want to mention a few things about after he was done with football, but anything else that sticks out to you, Brian, before we go?
Well, playoffs. I mean, he was a primetime playoff guy. If you remember the Super Bowl in 08, he scored the touchdown, just a little slant route, right? Nothing crazy. He comes up the middle, is able to get it. And he really showcased, you'd realize how fast Larry Fitzgerald was until he was in the open field. Yeah. And that Steelers defense was very, very good. They had a ton of talent. You had guys like Polamalu and Ike Taylor, and he just shoots past everybody. And he's and you're sitting here thinking it's like that might, do they score too much time? But he may just won the Super Bowl if Roethlisberger doesn't find Santonio Holmes in the corner of the end zone there. I mean, that's probably the greatest play in Arizona Cardinals history if that's a catch and if they end up winning the game. I will say this: I think it's overshadowed by the game he had in 16 against the Packers, which is one of the best playoff games I think I've ever witnessed or been able to watch live, where they have the Packers on the ropes and Rodgers on 4th. I think it was 4th and 20, ends up rolling out to his left and just throws up a Hail Mary to get him to midfield. And Jeff Janis, I don't remember if Janis caught both of them, but someone ends up coming down with it. And then they get a situation where they got 3 seconds left, and then they get another Hail Mary back-to-back, and the Packers tie the game. You're sitting here thinking, how did the Cardinals lose this? You know what I mean? You're going to overtime, and then one of the first plays in overtime, Carson Palmer spins off a guy, rolls out to his right, throws one of the slowest balls I think I've ever seen in my life. The ball hangs up in the air forever. Throws the one thing you're not supposed to do as a quarterback is you don't throw back against your body and you don't throw across the field. He's past the right hash marks, and he goes all the way over back to the other side where Larry Fitzgerald, there's no one within 40 yards of Larry. Just standing there on the other sideline, catches it, makes a couple of guys miss, goes around, and I think it's one of the slowest plays I've ever seen in my life, but he ends up getting the ball down to the 3-yard line. Larry's out of gas. Everything's going. And Bruce Arians says, hey, we're going to actually shovel it to you again. So, get ready. And he ends up scoring a touchdown. I think Al Michaels called it one of the best games. It's a phenomenal game. Ended up being the ending there. But Larry is, as far as Arizona Cardinals playoff history, Larry Fitzgerald probably it's really hard to find a highlight or a game where they had success and you see some good things happen to him where Larry Fitzgerald isn't at least in the game, let alone being the main the guy to actually have the football in his hands.
Yeah, an average play in the NFL is between 4 and 6 seconds. And that one play that I'm going to call it a screen play, even though it wasn't a screen pass at all. There was nothing screen about it. It was down the field and just everybody was deep. That was about 4 to 6 minutes it took for that one play. Yep. I've watched Clay Matthews, number 57 linebacker for the Packers. He's the only guy I watch. I know Larry's in the view, but I'm watching. He probably ran 275 yards easily on that one play just to try to get Larry. And it took forever for him to get inside the 10, inside the 8-yard line. And they scored shortly thereafter. But what it really was a great play in NFL history. He finished his NFL career with 7 records, and he had NFL records, and then he had 43 franchise records. Most receptions in his career, most receptions in a season, most receptions, most yards, most touchdowns, etc. It's just an amazing number. Personally, had some hardship, right? Loses his mom in 2003. And one of the things that his mom said is, I want you to get your education. I want you to get your degree. And he does. He doesn't get it at Pitt, but he gets it at the University of Phoenix. And he becomes a spokesman for him. And he was really the main focus for that school growing in an online world that was changing the way that education was. And Larry was a part of that as well. He's a minority owner of the Phoenix Suns. He's an excellent golfer. He's won the Pebble Beach Pro-Am twice, right? He's played in Augusta, and he just loves golf, and that's a part of it. He's a part of the Madden era, right? Being on the cover of
cover athlete,
of Madden. He was an analyst for ESPN. He had the Sirius XM show with Jim Gray and Tom Brady, the Let's Go podcast that he's been able to do with them. So obviously with Jim, and he would be on the Monday night games. They'd have a little moment with him before and at halftime of those games, and sometimes post game, and they'd have Brady on it at a separate occasion. But just to be a part of that threesome, to be invited to be a part of that's an honor you earned. His philanthropic activity, raising money and helping other people that need it. What a class act. I mean, here's a guy that really is deeply involved. I don't think he ever sleeps. I really don't. I think he's just too busy working on getting better, either at golf or ownership or his scholastic activities. There's so many different things that he's a part of that he can do. And I think he just lives life to the fullest. And for that alone is reason to recognize him. But then for all of the other NFL and pro football prowess that is a part of his career, obviously he's to be honored. And we wanted to take the time to do that today.
Do you think there'll ever be a non-quarterback to play as many years for one team as Larry? Because he's 17 years for Arizona. He might be the last guy to do that. A non-quarter, you know what I mean? Maybe even as a quarterback, though, 17 years with one team is insane. That's insane.
There are a couple guys that you would think, like, for example, in Atlanta, the Matthews family with Jake is entering, 11 or 12 years.
Yeah.
So it might be close, but for a
receiver though,
an offensive guy that touches the ball, that is seemingly another, I won't call it a record, but it's certainly one of those things that may go the way of the dodo and become extinct.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're that good, remember, if he's a Hall of Famer in so many different ways, but he's kind of earned the ability to go, hey, I should be paid more, no matter how much the home team is going to pay him. I'm going to try I'm going to take my talents to South Beach.
Go to New England, try to win a Super Bowl. Hey, let's go, you know what I mean? Go chase a ring. But he never did that. He never did. He stayed loyal to the Cardinals. He's and I think that's why, in my opinion, he's the face of their franchise. It's him. Has to be. Well,
let's look at some of the things that Larry was able to do. His number 1, which he wore at Pitt, that was retired. He was the first team All Big East in 2003. He was a unanimous All-American that year as well. Big East Offensive Player of the Year. He won the Paul Warfield, the Chick Harley, the Walter Camp, the Fred Biletnikoff Award, all during that time there at University of Pittsburgh. He was a first-team All-Pro in 2008. That was a Super Bowl year. Second-team All-Pro twice. Walter Payton Man of the Year in 2016. 11 times he ends up going to the Pro Bowl. He's a part of the NFL's 2010s All-Decade Team. He's a part of the NFL All 100-Year Anniversary Team. That in and of itself. And he wins the Art Rooney Award. Great honors that are a part of that. 1,400 receptions, 17,000 yards, 121 receiving touchdowns, and he is a member of the College Football Hall of Fame and soon to be in the National Football League Hall of Fame. He is Larry Darnell Fitzgerald.
Not much else to say. I think we covered everything, but he's a heck of a guy. Heck of a football player, heck of a guy. He's got both of those boxes checked.
Absolutely. Many folks would say, well, hey, if I'm going to start with the receiver, it's going to be Jerry Rice. If Jerry's off the board, though, picking Larry would not be a bad second choice. So we want to say we honor and we appreciate everything that Larry Fitzgerald was able to do for college and pro football. And we appreciate you being a part of our show here today. So for Jeremiah Long, for Brian LeBel, next week we'll have Vincent Turner back with us. I'm Harper LeBel saying thank you for tuning in to 100 Yards of Football. This has been our Legends show featuring Larry Fitzgerald. Have a fantastic day, everybody.